All right, I'm gonna cut off my sound.
Okay, it's preparing the live stream right now. And there we are, we're on YouTube. All right. Now, where did you all go? There you are.
Oh, am I supposed to unmute?
You can unmute if you need to say something. If you don't need to say something, mute. That just helps me not getting any feedback. I said if you want to say something, unmute, but other than that, stay on mute.
Okay.
What that does is it keeps sounds that could possibly come from your end to interrupting. And a lot of times when you're doing live streams or just streaming, or when you're doing anything on the internet, if more than one person is talking, one of their audios is going to overdo the other, and then you won't be able to hear the person. I'm kind of used to it. I do a lot of ministry with people online, and we all just get together and talk. We know how to overtalk each other, but sometimes you can lose what somebody else is saying, and even if a sound comes off yours. And anyway, let's see.
You're not muted, Betty.
Oh, goodness. What?
There you go. I would have did it for you, but then maybe you wouldn't realize you're muted, and I didn't want to do that. So, but again, if anybody wants to say anything during this thing, just unmute yourself and speak up. That's perfectly fine. I promise you. I don't mind that at all. That's what we're here for. Let's see. I didn't record this on Zoom last week, but I am going to record it now. So it's recording on YouTube. Which I don't know if I need the recording on Zoom. You know what? I don't need the recording on Zoom if we're doing it on YouTube. That's perfectly fine. Okay. So now, there it is. I was looking for the study. Found it. All right, so we're in, of course, in the book of Exodus, as we've been doing this study for a few weeks now. And we're finishing up chapter 2. So we're looking at verses 16 through 22 in chapter 2 now. This is going to be refuge in Midian. Last week we looked at Moses' attempt on his own to be the savior of his people. I think that was particularly a good study to look at, and it shows us the difference between when we try to do things on our own and at our own time rather than giving it up to God and really trying to follow this way. The things don't work out. They didn't work out well with Moses, but we do know that God providentially brings it back about and uses Moses to be the savior of the people from Israel. But then Moses gives all the credit to God, as he should. But for tonight, we're going to look at verses 16 through 22. Like I said, refuge in Midian. And let me open us up in prayer and ask God to bless our study tonight. Father, we thank you for this time that we can come together and study your word. Lord, we ask that although we didn't talk specifically about prayer requests tonight, Lord, that all those that are on our minds, we want to lift them up to you. We want to lift up those who have had medical procedures, who have treatments. Father, that you would be with them and strengthen them through all those times. We ask you would be with them, that you would be with our church, both in Rosedale and in Gunnison, as we come to a place in the next couple of weeks where we're going to meet together again. That you would strengthen us for that. That you would be with us for that. And Father, we ask that as we look at Exodus chapter 2 tonight, that you would be with us, that you would grant us discernment, open our eyes and ears so we might see and hear. Father, I pray that whatever is said tonight would be pleasing in your sight. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, so Exodus chapter 2, verses 16 through 22. Let me read those. And I have those in a different place. Look at that. I didn't have it pulled up. I had Revelation pulled up and then together. So Exodus. In verse, oh, hit Exodus 12. All right, Exodus 2, starting in verse 16. Like I said, we just come off of Pharaoh had killed the Egyptian, and then he was afraid it was found out because of an Israelite, what he had said the next day, and now he has fled Egypt. And fled is like got out in a hurry, didn't want anybody to see him. And now he's in Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now, and we talked about that last week. Before I read 16 through 22, I'll just say this. Before this happened, actually tonight's going to be 16 through the end of the chapter. I don't know why I keep saying 22, but anyway, 25. But I just want to say that in verse 15, where we stopped at last week, when it said, and Moses stayed in the land of Midian and sat down by the well. Remember, it doesn't necessarily mean that he had ran out of Egypt and just got to the well, and then this is what happens. So it more, I think it's more than likely the case that Moses had already settled in Midian, and he settled down somewhere close to this well, which would have been a center for the community. So now, as we start that, I'm going to start reading in verse 16, and I'm going to read through the end of the chapter in chapter 2. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, where he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Now, sorry about that. My dog saw someone outside. They're always going to bark. So this is this section here, verses 16 through 22, is of the refuge in Midian, and this is where I got confused earlier. Then you have a little section that's a kind of a we've had in relation a parenthetical pause that talks about something else in more specific throughout the end of from 23 to 25 is talking about some things, some specific events that happened in Egypt. But 16 through 22 is the refuge in Midian that Moses had. Now Midian, it was part of Arabia, east of the Gulf of Aqaba. But the Midianites, these people who lived here, they were nomads, and they could be found over really a considerable area on either side of the Gulf. It was an area outside of Egyptian control, and I think because of that, we can suppose that Moses moved there as fast as he could, because he was fleeing away from Pharaoh, because Pharaoh sought to kill him. Now Moses here is pictured at the well, of course, at least near the well, which would have been the center of a community in a desert area. He had escaped from Pharaoh, but he really didn't know what he was going to do next. But God's providential ordering of events, they give him the answer to what it is that he's going to do next. We see in verse 16 that there was now a priest of Midian, had 7 daughters. This priest's name is given to us in verse 18 as Reuel, but we'll find out in chapter 3, verse 1, that he's better known as Jethro. It's not so much his name, but the fact that he's a priest, I think, is significant. The Midianites, these people, they were actually descended from Abraham. We see that in Genesis chapter 17, verse 20. Not all of the Midianite tribes had retained the true worship of God. Again, we find that from passages in Genesis and also in Numbers. But as we see in Judges chapter 1, verse 16, Jethro is referred to as a Kenite. Now, probably subgroup of the Midianites. And it could very well be that their religion, this Kenite religion, was less corrupt than it was elsewhere. Indeed, Jethro, this Rual that we have here, is called the priest of Midian. And that expression, that the priest, it may simply just mean that he is a priest about whom that we're going to talk about, that we see here in chapter 2. But later usage of it in the Hebrew language, like in 1 Samuel 1:9, would mean that he occupied the office of high priest in Midian. Because of the priest. See, it's important in either Hebrew or Greek when the article is used, which is the word the. So when it says the of something, it's always talking about a specific. But it seems that he would probably occupy this office of high priest in Midian. But it's really unlikely that he was the only in Midian, or that he was the high priest in all of the Midianites. That's probably not it. But it may have been that he held this office among the Kenites. Though we really don't have any evidence to support the idea that was once common, and that was that Moses derived his religion from Jethro. It's probably that Jethro's religion still retained much that was actually true, or it was closer to the true worship of God than the rest of the Midianites. He, that is Jethro, he's shown to us as a worshiper of the one true God in the same way that Melchizedek was from Genesis chapter 14. Similar knowledge of God is to be found in the book of Job, which is set in the patriarchal times in the land of Uz, possibly Edom, and that would be an area north of Midian. We see that in Job chapter 1. But first, there is this story of Jethro's daughters. Moses was at the well wondering what to do next. And then it says, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock, these daughters of Jethro. It was in those days, it was the task of the women to draw water. So here it is the use of their father's flock, for the use of their father's flock of sheep and goats, which is what they were trying to water. This area wouldn't have been sufficient to support any kind of cattle. So these were sheep and goats. Then it says in verse 17 that some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock, or saved them. Sometimes it's been supposed that Moses wasn't alone, that he had somebody with him, and that's the way he was able to drive away this number of shepherds, because shepherds is plural here. But I think that's highly unlikely. I don't think that's actually. Hold on 1 second.
My dog's here and his dog's barking, so she's barking. Somebody must be at his door.
Can y'all hear me?
Can now?
My little thing doesn't have very many percents left, so if I go away, that's what happened. Did y'all hear my phone ring a while ago?
Put your charger on it. Put your charger on it while you're going.
Well, it's in the bedroom. It's in the bedroom.
Well, you
Okay.
got time. I had to take a break there anyway. Dana had drove up, and that's why the dogs were so loud. And they get so loud when she comes in, I just can't keep going. But they're calmed down now. But you got time to go get your charger if you need to.
Well, I can't reach the plug from where I'm sitting. Just go ahead.
Ziggy, come here. You might just have to sit in my lap, girl. Come here.
Hell now.
This is the loudmouth. Her sister's not quite as bad. You might have to do this study with me, so I keep
Ellie's barking.
Huh?
Ellie's hearing them bark and she's barking.
Well, if I hold her, she doesn't bark. See, like Dana. All right.
Just kept giving me drink.
Did they?
They did.
I bet. You want to say hey to everybody?
Hey. Let me see. Hey. I
Diana,
miss y'all. Are we still shooting for the
31st.
31st?
31st.
Yay! Oh, I'll be so excited. See everybody. It was so hard not to hug everybody though.
I know. That's not good.
Can I just bring Cam Lawson and we just lasso everybody down?
No,
Bye.
he's gone.
Yeah, I gotta go pick up one more.
What she say, just lasso everybody down?
Oh, that just fell off. What it? Yeah, she said, can we not bring some lights on? Just lights all everybody down. That way you hug. It is gonna be hard as Baptists not to hug. All right. So we'll get done with this, so we're not here forever. So we're talking about Moses. We're talking about Jethro's daughters come to the well, wander their flock, and he saved them. So he gets up because the shepherds came in to basically bully the girls. And I was talking about, I thought that some say that there were other people with Moses to help him drive away this number of shepherds. But I don't think that's right. I think that's unlikely. The shepherds who were seeking to take advantage of these women were by getting the water or taking over the water. They were simply bullies. And when they were opposed by somebody like Moses, they really offered little resistance. I think that's very much more the case of what happened there. Most bullies are that way. If somebody stands up to them, they go away. Moses was able to rescue these ladies. That is, bring and that's the verb rescue or saved. It's used of God in chapter 14 as well. But once again, as we had seen earlier, we see Moses' concern for justice and his fair-mindedness. He was prepared to stand up for those who were unable to do anything for themselves. As these women couldn't stand up to the shepherds, he stood in their place. And indeed, what he did went beyond that. He himself, he not only saved the women from the harassment of the bullies, but he also watered their flock. Though Moses had been rejected by his own people and thought that, and though that his attempts to help them have ended in failure, like we talked about last week, he was not abandoned or had not abandoned his concern for the oppressed people. Though he was a fugitive, he's still motivated by faith and has not renounced his desire for justice and fairness, even to the extent of getting personal for the rest of others. In verse 18, it says, when the girls returned to Ruel, their father, he asked them, why have you returned so early today? Now, it may be that that the interpretation of the interruption rather of their routine, it caused them to go back home sooner than was usual, or it could have been the actions of the shepherds ordinarily delayed them, like this was something that had happened over and over again with the shepherds. The name Ruel is found elsewhere. It was found in Genesis 36. It's in First Chronicles, and it may mean either companion or friend of God, or possibly shepherd of God. It's possible, but unlikely that it could be read the other way around, that like God is a friend. More than likely, it's companion or friend of God. But he's also known as Jethro, like I said in chapter 3, verse 1. We're going to see that, which may be a title that signifies excellency, is kind of that Hebrew or title comes from. So anyway, their dad asked them why they come home so early, and they answered him and said that an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock, in verse 19. The way shepherds are the way the shepherds are referred to here fits with the behavior being already known about. That, like I said, more than likely, this is a situation they run into quite regularly with being pushed off of the well. The women seem to act expressed some kind of surprise that it was an Egyptian who had acted in this way and then helped them with their flock. Now, I would think that they could tell he was an Egyptian probably from his clothes and his speech. But this is also something to keep in mind. Notice that nowhere in Exodus is communication with people of other languages presented as a problem. It must have been the case that in the areas where people mixed with where peoples of different languages mixed, that it was usual to have at least some type of knowledge of other languages. Moses is here presented as the rescuer or the savior in a way, the one who snatched them away from trouble. And that's a different word from verse 17. It is, of course, the Lord who is supremely the rescuer. And that we'll see in chapter 3, verse 8, and chapter 6, verse 6 when we get there too. Their father is astounded at their behavior, right? And what does he say? And where is he? In verse 20, he asked his daughters, why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. Right? Desert communities like they lived in, they have always had a tradition of extending hospitality to strangers, including Egyptians. They must at least offer some type of meal of friendship to the one who had helped them out. So he's astonished that his daughters didn't do this. But this meal that Moses comes to have with him, it quickly went beyond just a meal. Ruel decides on the basis of his meeting with Moses here to extend protection and friendship to him. Moses agreed to stay with the man, tells us in verse 21. He recognized that this family was one that he could settle with, that it was no doubt quite different than an Egyptian palace, but he felt secure and he didn't have to be a wanderer anymore in his eyes. And it wasn't just one-sided, that Ruel thought that this would be a good thing, or that Moses thought that this would be a good thing, because it says Ruel gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. So both were definitely in agreement this was a good thing for both of them. Zipporah, it's the name of a small bird, actually. And there's a parallel here with the career of Joseph, if you think about it, who was also used by God to deliver his people. And who in a foreign land married the daughter of a priest. That happened in Genesis 41-45. Could be that Moses agreed to give his service to Ruel in lieu of a dowry that would have been owed ordinarily. In any of these near ancient Near Eastern weddings, there's usually a dowry. So it could just be that Moses offered his services to Ruel for his daughter's hand. Zipporah, it says, gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershon, saying, I have become an alien in a foreign land. That's verse 22. Now, the name Gershom indicates banishment or expulsion. But Moses gave it a new twist by taking it as two words rather than one. The first indicating a resident alien, one living in a foreign country, but not really part of it. And the second that corresponded to the English word there. Name stranger there. Where does that refer to? The New International Version, the way it renders it, it refers to it as Midian. Moses, I think, is at this time he's depressed and dispirited. He failed in his attempts to deliver his people, and he expresses his forlornness here, if you will. But it would be right to detect here that Moses was. Would it be right to say that Moses was homesick for Egypt? You see, it's also possible to render his explanation of the name Gershom as I have been a stranger in a foreign land. The New King James, I think, uses it that way. And in that case, this there that we're talking about is Egypt rather than Midian. And Moses is thinking about his past. Now, for all the status that he enjoyed in Egypt, he had not really belonged. So he went, and the extent to which the birth of his son, he now felt at home in Midian, only proved that point, that he really didn't belong where he was in the Egyptian palace. Now, there are really close parallels to the account of Moses meeting his wife, Zipporah, at the well, and if you'll remember, Jacob's meeting Rachel back in Genesis 29, and of Abraham's servant meeting Rebekah, Genesis 24. Now, in all these instances, one of the leading patriarchal figures takes a wife from a people who were not part of the chosen people. This name, Gershom here, it may well reinforce that point. But nonetheless, the hand of God is at work. The similarities in these stories, I think if you look at them, if you say, well, this is similar to that, they shouldn't be taken to imply that they are deliberately patterned on one another. I think they testify the importance of wells and water, not just to survive in the East, but also as social meeting points. God over and over shows that though the descendants of Abraham are the chosen line of promise, the salvation that is being worked out is not exclusively confined to them. That's something that Paul really gets into in the New Testament. These marriages are anticipations of the eventual inclusion in the promise of all peoples on earth. Where does that promise come from? Back to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. Now, in verses 23 through 25, this is God remembering his covenant. It's a short transitional paragraph, and it's not merely a device to pass over another 40-year period, which is about what it passes over, but that's not really what it's about. The story switches back, like I said, to what was going on in Egypt. I said that when we started this, events that were, you can say, coming to a head. And misery for the Israelites was coming in. The people had suffered so much that they no longer saw an advantage to being in Egypt if it involved such suffering. And in their distress, they cry out to God. It only seems to have been at this point that they became aware of the need for divine intervention to effect their deliverance. God had been waiting for the time he considered to be right for the rescue of the Israelites. During that long period, the king of Egypt died, as it says in verse 23. So the ruler of Egypt changes at this point. And I think it's implied, and I think it's a proper implication, that this king who died is the same person that sought to kill Moses from back in verse 15. So and we talked a little bit about this in history, in the history before we began the study, but if the historical alignment with Egypt that's accepted by most of conservative scholars is right, then this king of Egypt who died could very well have been Thutmose III. Had the Israelites been hoping for a change in policy when his reign had ended? Possibly, but if that is the case, if that's what they hoped for, then they were going to be sorely disappointed. It says the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. So it was saying that only now did the intensity of their suffering, and perhaps even their frustration at the lack of change in Egyptian policy, drive the Israelites to pray to God. They cry out, it says, an action that is born out of wretchedness and gives an expression to their agony. But at the same time, that word, this cry out, it can be used for a violent complaints in chapter 11. Their cry for help, it actually comes from a different root word than cried out, but their cry for help is born out of the pain and misery of their desperate situation as slaves. But it is not turned inwards to see if they can help themselves alleviate their situation, nor is it turned to Pharaoh and the bureaucracy of Egypt. They knew that they were being wronged by Egypt, and there was only one source of assistance that could be effective against this regime that was put over them, this king of Egypt. In verse 24, it says, God heard their groaning, or God heard their cry out. So God is not indifferent to conditions here on earth. I don't think we ever need to get into the position where we think that is the case, that he is indifferent. He is not. He responds to the cries of his people. We see it in chapter 3 and chapter 6. Not just in pity because of their wretchedness, or the wretchedness of their nation as slaves, but also in faithfulness because of his special relationship with them. Back from Genesis chapter 12. He remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So remembering here is more than a matter of just calling it to mind. It's not like you or me, like, oh, I remembered that. That's not what we have with God, as if God could ever forget anything. It rather, I think, indicates bringing something to mind in such a way that it is a prelude to action. Just as God remembered Noah in the ark and took action to cause the flood to recede. If you'll remember that from back in Genesis chapter 8. Now, what God now remembers is his covenant with the patriarchs and the solemn commitments that he had given to them regarding their offspring, the possession of the land of promise, and particularly the limited nature of the oppression that they would have to undergo. Now that they were calling on him to intervene on behalf. So verse 25, so God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Now, was concerned about, that phrase there, it can literally means knew. So he knew about it. This also is not just a matter of the availability of facts, talking about this type of knowledge. The facts of their situation had never escaped God. It's a matter of acknowledging them as his people and determining to act on their behalf. Now, looking back on this, God's preparations for actions, they're not always immediately evident to us, but there can be no doubt that he is active and that he is controlling events so that they come together to further his purposes. We get that all over the New Testament yet again. It's all throughout Pauline theology. We are then able, with Moses, look back and trace how it is that God in our own lives. This is the basis of true thanksgiving and self-dedication. The psalmist in Psalm 116 says, how can I repay the Lord for all his goodness to me? Moses was able to see the superintending providence of God working for his good as far back as the circumstances of his earliest days. Even though we may find it difficult to trace, that is true of all whom the Lord calls to his service, including many of us and all of us. I mean, he could say to Jeremiah in Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. The Apostle Paul, after his conversion, could look back on the varied circumstances of his life and his previous hostility toward Christians. He said at one point that he had tried to destroy the church, but he could speak of the God who set me apart from earth and called me by his grace. That's Galatians chapter 1, verse 15. Now, such awareness of God's control and guidance, I think it evokes a sense of wonder and gratitude about the mysteries of life and about the care and intricacy of the divine provision that we have available for us. We see that in Psalm 139. But knowing that God has a purpose for our lives and that he is in control, it doesn't absolve us of responsibility for seeking to order our lives in the ways that please him. In this, the events of Moses' life are recorded here, present both a challenge and a warning. They challenge us to act with discernment and concern that Moses displayed towards his own people in their misery. He could have at that point cocooned himself, wrapped himself up and put himself away in the duties and the luxuries of court, right? He was an Egyptian prince. And he could have just, how would the New Testament saying go? He could have just passed by on the other side, as we see with the Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, pretending not to notice the problems that existed. And I think it is to Moses' credit that he refused to follow that type of course. And on the other hand, there's also a warning here. Even though the end in view is right and proper, whatever that is, that doesn't legitimize every action that is taken in pursuit of that end, even against a tyrannical regime. Christ, it seems, had to warn even his closest disciples that they did not know what kind of spirit they were of when they advocated a course of action towards those who had refused to receive Jesus. That's in Luke chapter 9, verse 55. The Lord's messenger must take care that he is trying to advance the Lord's cause in the Lord's way. And that finishes up chapter 2. And next Wednesday, we will start in chapter 3. Now, are there any questions or comments about that? So you'll find that unmute
Oh,
button here in a
okay.
minute. There it is.
What happened? I don't know. I always thought Moses was made to a Gershon woman before this one. How many wives did he have? I didn't know this Zipporah. I didn't think was the first one. I don't know where I think that.
I think she was. I'm pretty sure she was. Let's see.
So why do you hear about a Gershon woman sometimes with Moses?
Well, Gershom, well,
That's his son's name, Gershon.
yeah, his son is that name, but that also means alien to the land,
Okay.
a sojourner in an alien place.
So he just had one wife that we know of.
I think so, but I'm looking. Yeah, I
That was
think.
unusual too back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it happened a lot. Well, no, let's see. Moses also. Let's see.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that would be it. It's just Zipporah. I had to make sure. I thought that he only had the one wife, but yeah, it's just the one wife. Gershom is his son. That's what he
Okay.
named him. And like I was saying, I think that has a lot to do with him thinking
Coming
back on his time in Egypt. Even in Egypt, I mean, he's a sojourner in the land or an alien in the land in Midian, but he was also that way in Egypt too because he was a Hebrew in the palace. He was a Hebrew considered an Egyptian. He's by the Pharaoh's daughter. So yeah, that works both ways.
Okay. That's good. Thank you.
I think he was supposed to, I don't know, that might just been in the movie. Was he supposed to marry an Egyptian?
Well, I just looked up the word. I said Gershon, Cushite.
Cushite?
C-U-S. Yes. It says was a Cushite princess who married Moses prior to Sephora, as told in the book of Exodus. But I don't see it. It's not anywhere that I could find it. Oh, I believe you.
I'm looking.
Okay, that's right. It could be the movie.
No, Cushite. Let's see. One, it leads many to surmise another wife, and this is from a source on Got Questions, which is a pretty good place to go sometimes. But it says, however, Numbers 12:1 leads many to surmise another wife. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. The question of the number of Moses's wives hinges on the identity of this Cushite or Ethiopian woman. Is this a reference to Zipporah, or is this another woman? Let's see, and I haven't read this article. It's really small, but I'm trying to see.
According to this, they think it was that Zipporah was a Cushite.
The Cushite, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say because it seems to be that Kenite, Cushite, that could be the same thing.
We said in the book of Numbers, Miriam and Joshua are upset at him about taking a Cushite wife. But I think Zipporah is the Cushite wife.
But is his sister with him? How does he know he got married? Oh, Lordy.
Didn't Joshua and Miriam both end up with him?
Maybe when he went back later, he got him or something.
I don't know.
Well, to Cushite would be Ethiopian. So even this article says this is kind of, I mean, yeah, it's a good question to bring it because this is something that's debatable, which I haven't looked into much. But it says that it is possible, though not probable, that the Cushite is Zipporah. Arguing against that possibility are two facts. The link between Midianites and Ethiopians is very difficult to trace convincingly, and to the marriage raised by Miriam and Aaron seems to indicate a recent event. Moses and Zipporah would have been married for over 40 years by this time, and it is unlikely that Moses' siblings would just then be protesting. Much more
Yeah.
likely is that Zipporah had died, although her death is not recorded in Scripture, and then Moses had remarried. I think it's probably a very plausible explanation for it, because this is a long time after. It's like the whole parenthetical thing, or the whole transition phrase or paragraph at the end of chapter 2 is telling us that 40 years basically has passed. So Moses and Zipporah have been married for 40 years. It's quite possible that she had already passed, or that she, at least by the time that Numbers 12 is talking about with Aaron and Miriam.
Okay.
So yeah, it's
Okay, look, y'all, I'm on 3%. I'm
Possible.
fixing to lose
What's
you.
up?
So we'll talk to
You
you
about to
later.
die. You're
All right.
thing.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye, Miss Betty.
How do I turn this off? I might be-
Find the leave meeting button.
Here.
I don't see a leave button. Oh,
Yeah,
there it is.
just-
Okay, bye.
Bye.
I say I can. Oh yeah, she got
Yeah.
it. There we go. All right, but yeah, it's quite possible that that the Cushite woman talked about, number 12, is Zipporah, but it seems, at least from a very, very quick look at it, that it's more than likely that Zipporah had died, and this Cushite woman is someone that Moses had remarried, or it's the second marriage.
Okay.
Not that they were married at the same time. And even though, like it says, Exodus doesn't record, or Scripture at all doesn't record Zipporah's death, it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that didn't happen.
Right.
I mean,
Left us.
was it?
I said Lisa left us.
Yeah, she may have tried to say something. She has one of those, like I talked about, her microphone really gets overtaken by anybody else talking. So if you'll notice, when she tries to talk, if anybody else says anything, you can't hear a word she says.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know exactly why that is, but I've noticed that talking to people on the internet a lot. Any other questions or comments? See, I thought that ended really well. I thought it was a good deal that just it just shows God's providence and how he works with people, and I think it's just such an amazing thing.
Yeah, he's in charge, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know how people who don't see God as in charge, in control, I don't know how they get through life, because
We had a young man today, I don't know him,
just
29 years old. He jumped off that bridge. We have a bridge here going
Hmm.
across the river. 29.
yeah. Well,
Yes.
unfortunately, suicides are going to go. Probably going to. They've already went up a lot, and they're probably going to go up more. I mean, if you think about it, you take people who already have some type of mental problems, and then you put them, you tell them they have to stay in their house and they can't come out. And if they do, there's a virus out there that might kill you, and it's going to drive them worse. It's going to drive them hard into depression and all kind of crazy things. So this country opening up some is very important on a lot of fronts. Domestic violence has went up a lot. You know, you put a lot of families together that they're not used to being together for a long period of time. Unfortunately, you get domestic violence that happens.
Yeah, they say CPS has had
It's
way
just
more
terrible.
calls.
Yep.
I can imagine. So the drug use will go up, alcohol use goes up. And there aren't many people out there who use alcohol properly. I know we're Baptists, but alcohol is not inherently sinful. There's nothing wrong with someone who has a drink or something like that, but not many people can control that. And most people drink to get drunk, which is a sin. And that's happening a lot more because of these lockdowns. So, you know, some people said that from the get-go that the cure that they propose could be worse than, you know, could be worse as far as that type of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. This makes me sad, and I pray that it's over quick. So
Yeah, it's been long enough.
yeah, you ready to hug
What?
kids?
Yeah, that's gonna be hard. All getting
So you ready
together.
to hug
not
on your
hugging.
grandkids?
Hey, I hugged 2 of them today.
Did you?
Ava and Sadie came out here and Ava begged me to let her hug me. And I said, well, I can't say not hugging them forever. It's been 3 months since I hugged them.
There you go.
Well-
I'm happy for you. I'm glad you did.
Well,
A nursing home up here had, it's one of those cartoon characters. And it's a big giant balloon and they're hugging. Then they take the suit and clean it and the other family can come in and hug all their relatives in the nursing home. This big, huge thing. It is so cute.
Okay, yeah, that's neat because yeah, that's another thing of it. You know, we aren't meant to be separated, right? God said it's not good for and man, I would think I mean, it would apply generally to mankind, even though in that situation it applied to Adam, but I think that applies to mankind. It's just, we're not meant to be alone. And we're not meant to be apart. And yeah, like I said, it's put a crazy strain on this country that I hope is gone.
Brenda, Catherine Crump will have a hard time because she'll hug you if she sees you 5 times in the same day.
I think she's staying on the lake.
I think she is. She's a hugger. But I'll be happy, Chris. I'll be around after next week. If there's something to do at the church to get ready, I don't know if you wipe down before or after and doorknobs.
Well, I
But let
mean,
me know. I'll be glad to do whatever.
have we had? I don't know. I don't, because I'm not involved with it. But I mean, has the cleaning crew still? Do we have a cleaning lady or?
Yes, she came just before, I think just before the shutdown.
Probably
Okay,
hadn't been back.
maybe have her come in and clean, or if you all wanna-
Nobody's been in there since she cleaned, but
Yeah.
I was fixing to say, I think it's got to be deep cleaned, all church be deep cleaned before you.
Well, but we haven't nobody's been in there.
Oh, true.
yeah, nobody.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Now, there is one thing that they did suggest, and it's suggested in there that is something we might could look at, Miss Brenda. And I haven't talked to George about it, but I will. And that is
Clean the knobs.
well, no, the filtration system. So the filters that are in the
Yeah.
air units, they ask for a specific. They have some specific ones that actually filter out viruses and stuff. If we could get somebody maybe to put those in. Because that helps. That helps a lot with the returns.
Joseph, we
Be
can
able to
put
cycle
those
that
in
in.
if you know
Yeah,
what
as it
kind.
cycles, if it can clean itself, that'd be.
Well, I've got some.
Yeah, it was in it. I don't know if it said what kind exactly. I think it's just, I don't know what kind.
Well, you
He
can,
will know and probably have a supply of them in there.
Yeah. Whoever services the units would know. I would think.
That's Mitchell Fields. I bet he would know.
Right. Did we ever get that thing fixed last year?
There's a whole new unit.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it kept breaking.
Oh, no, they put in a whole new one. It's beautiful. And well, before I left, it was working good.
Okay, well, maybe I just don't remember. I just remember it was like it worked great one Sunday and then it was
No,
out.
they put in a new one and it kept breaking. It kept.
Oh, that.
They had to put in 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. So
kept breaking, the new one kept breaking.
yeah.
Well, I hope it works because if it gets hot, I start coughing.
I would kick you out.
Yeah, we're gonna kick you out. You get the coffin. Keep a mask on you.
It said for somebody to be outside to open the door for everybody, so everybody wouldn't have to touch the knobs
Well, we
and
do that-
clean them
we
every
do that
once in a while.
anyway.
I've got some Lysol wipes I can take up there for.
I've got all kind of, yeah. I've got,
And some hand sanitizer things. We need some of those like at the entrance.
Or we
I think
can.
George said he had a bunch of those. I think.
We can only use. I mean, it said to use several different entrances, but as few of us as there are,
Yeah.
we don't need but that one entrance.
Yeah, we just need that one. We're perfectly fine with that.
and there was something in there about not having a nursery.
Yeah, I don't think we need to have that. I know Dana was talking about she's wanting to come over, but
No, but we want to see the boys. Yeah,
we're
figure it
gonna
out.
keep the kids at home for a
Well, I'll be back. I'll check with you, Brenda or George. I'll do whatever we can do.
Okay, I got some bulletin board stuff, some letters and some stuff we might can use.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
don't
gotta
have a
go in
problem.
there. I still got the crosses up. I'd like to go in there and take them down, and get that done.
Yeah,
Well, I'm free.
you're free. And we could definitely put that bulletin that they suggested, those questions, we could put it on the door
Uh-huh.
again on Sunday mornings. And just
Right.
so when people walk in, they can see it. And maybe, I don't think most people that are, I mean, we just don't have a ton of people. I think common sense will come into play. Just like the lots are talking about, they're not going to come for a while, which is perfect.
Makes sense. And
Yeah,
long,
he is not well.
Right.
yeah. And Miss
Well, Flamita said that she visited with Laurel last Saturday for about 2 hours
Oh.
and said seemed like she had more pep to her that day. And then a friend of mine said that he saw them riding around Sunday.
Oh.
But, they discontinued the treatments. They think that was what was causing all of her pain and everything.
Well, good. I hope that
But
happens.
she was supposed to go on this week to have some shots in her knees. And she's on a walker and she can't hardly get around.
Well, I'm glad they did that. Let me real quickly say goodbye to the people on YouTube. I'm going to stop that stream. You don't have to go anywhere. But thank you for watching if you watched on YouTube.